Hallo ihr Lieben, herzlich willkommen zum Podcast Beziehungszeit. Hello dear friends, welcome to my podcast Time for Relationship or Time for Relating. My name is Franzi and I offer energetic healing and holistic life coaching and relationship coaching. And in this interview I want to introduce you to Andrew Harner. I made one other interview already with him, the link you find here. There we spoke more about him, how he's personally and his journey with living in very many different homes in his childhood. So it's more about really getting to know him personally. And in this interview it's about ethical veganism and his history and his story with this topic and how he came to it and how it was for him starting 20 years ago out of ethical reasons to not eat meat or animal products, where our world was really not prepared for it. And yeah, now it's improving, but still it's a really big topic also in relationships. And he also speaks about how maybe to deal with the situation that one partner is vegan and the other one not. And yeah, in general, I'm very impressed by this conversation and it really had a lasting impact on me and really changed my perspective, and I could get to know or I can feel it more now, and it really switched something. So yeah, I can really recommend. And I want to apologize because one thing is that it went a bit dark in the end of the video, so I hope it's okay that you mainly will see our shadows. And the other thing is that we were at a really nice spot, and if you are the owner who is listening right now, thank you very much that we could make it there, and thank you, it's really so beautiful place. Thank you for all your art. And yeah, but the thing was that it was close to a street, and yeah, sometimes you will hear some motorcycles or scooters passing by, and yeah, I hope it's okay. And now I wish you a very pleasant journey to ethical veganism and hope you get some inspirations out of it. Enjoy and have a good time. What is ethical veganism for you?
For me, ethical veganism is really like a non-violence practice. It's about trying to do less harm in the world. And it's not really about being perfect. I think being alive means always causing some harm in inadvertent or intentional ways. But one of the ways that I try to do less harm in my life is to not eat animals or the products of animals. And I've been doing that for close to 20 years. Yeah.
How did you come to this?
So when I was about 20 or so, I put on a lot of weight. When I was a teenager, I was pretty fat, and I wanted to lose weight. And for the first time in my life, I really began thinking a lot about the choices I made when I ate. And at first, that was just about, how many calories am I eating, how processed is the food that I'm eating. But then, before long, I also began thinking about where does the food come from. And initially, I became vegetarian, more or less, and then I realized pretty quickly after that the reasons for being vegetarian extended to being vegan. So by the time I was 21, I was trying to eat vegan. And it took me, I think 6 or 7 years to go 100%. But yeah, it was, yeah. So since then, I've been, for maybe 13 years now, I've been 99.9% vegan. Yeah.
thanks. And do you take extra pills to feel completely nourished and to have all the ingredients, or how do you make it? Or do you make it also with, I don't know, how do you make it?
Yeah. I mean, the one vitamin or mineral, the one nutrient that is very difficult to get from plant sources is B12. So after I had been vegan for 8 or 10 years, I went and I got my blood levels checked, and my B12 was fine. Everything was fine, B6, iron, but I still thought it'd be good to occasionally take a B12 supplement just to be protective. So I take a B12 supplement maybe once a week now, and that's pretty much it. Yeah. Otherwise,
and that's everything.
Yeah. Otherwise, I try to eat a big variety of fruits and vegetables, and I still eat junk food sometimes, but mostly fruits and vegetables and whole grains and beans and lentils and tofu and tempeh, and to a lesser extent seitan because it makes me bloaty. But I do love bread. And then I do sometimes take a protein powder, mostly when I'm doing a lot of working out, a lot of strength training, just because when I'm doing that I try to eat a little bit more protein anyway, and it's a lot easier to just throw a scoop of protein powder in my morning smoothie than it is to eat a second block of tofu at dinner. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. What would you say did it change in your life? So maybe in different ways. Maybe what did it change with the mind? What did it change with how you feel from the body, and maybe also for the soul, or I don't know. So maybe on different levels, what did it change this decision?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's probably 2 or 3 effects I think it had. One thing for me is that I'm specific in saying that I'm an ethical vegan because the decision to eat healthy came a year before the decision to eat vegan, and they were for completely separate reasons. One was about taking care of myself, and the other one was doing less harm to other sentient beings. So for me, that's one thing, is it's very disconnected from the health thing, the physical health, the health of the body. But it does feel because it allows me to better live my values, which I'm always trying to work on, to be a more compassionate individual, to live life with respect to other beings. It does feel, I think to say it's a spiritual practice is a little bit much, but I do feel more complete as a person, and I feel more aligned with my own values and the kind of person that I want to be. And then another big shift that I experienced in being vegan as well is how I relate to other people who aren't vegan. And initially I tended to have I think a lot less humor and a lot less patience about it. And I think that's common in a lot of people who go vegan at first, because what really stands out to you is how hard it is to be vegan. Not because eating plant-based is hard, but because the society we have built makes it very hard to eat vegan.
In which way?
So even if you go to a grocery store, they have big sections dedicated to meat and eggs and milk. And it's only in the last couple of years that things like soy milk and almond milk and oat milk became common, or that you were able to get lentils, for example, sometimes are not common. Linsen are not common to find in a grocery store. They used to not be. Now you can find some more kinds, but not the full extent of lentils that I would love to see. I would love to go to a grocery store and be able to choose between 10 different types of lentils, because at the end of the day, I cook with 10 different types of lentils, and you can only find 2 of them at most grocery stores. Or even tofu is sometimes really hard to find. And when you go out to eat at a restaurant, Of course, it's very easy to find a restaurant with many meat options. Sometimes they have no vegan options at all. Like the salad has cheese and chicken in it and a creamy dressing. And it's not because it's hard to eat vegan that it's hard to be vegan. It's just that society, as we have built it, is very meat-centric. It's very animal product-centric. So especially when you're a new vegan, that can be really frustrating. And then also you get a lot of judgment from other people. People tend to make fun of you. They tend to ask the same annoying questions. And all of it combines to really make you feel alienated. And I think then that gets reversed in how you relate to other people, and you begin to resent them. So at first when I was vegan, I was annoyed and resentful and alienated. And then admittedly, as I moved out to California, where it's easier to be vegan, and I was vegan for a longer time, and I had more access to vegan restaurants, I felt less stressed out about it. And I also developed more of a sense of humor about it and more patience. And I think that is a way that I've grown as a person from being vegan as well, is how I relate to other people and have more patience for other points of view, even when I am personally convinced that those points of view are violent and wrong. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. That was a very long answer because I have a lot of feelings behind this. Oh my God.
Just express.
That was the longest answer I think I've given so far in all of these interviews.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, just express.
I'll keep expressing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. But it is interesting then, isn't it, how the veganism actually does connect really tightly to relationships. Because being vegan in a non-vegan world, it affects almost all of your relationships. I remember when I was about 15 or so, my younger sibling went vegetarian, and the rest of the family went vegetarian with them to support them. I did not. I made fun of them for being vegetarian, and I would eat my meat loudly in front of them, and I would make fun of them, and I was a real asshole. And so I've been on both sides of it. Yeah, it just shows up everywhere. It's not just the grocery store, it's not just the dinner table with friends and family, but it's even things like when you work a job, and maybe the company brings in lunch for you, but they might not bring in a vegan option. That's actually been something that's in the various jobs I've had has oftentimes taken a lot of me speaking up and saying I would like to have a vegan option so I can eat the lunch that's provided. But it can feel very awkward to do that at the workplace. And it can get you kind of labeled as the annoying vegan, depending on how you do it. Or even traveling here in Thailand. One of the things that I've quite wanted to do, even is go on different tours, day trips, and they say, oh, lunch is provided. And I've emailed a couple of people who organize these tours and say, but do you provide a vegan option? And because it's Thailand and they're getting very used to vegans and they see that there's a demand in the market, they always say, yes, thank you. I was at a bed and breakfast, and a lovely old woman asked me what I wanted for breakfast the next morning, and she offered pancakes or eggs, and I said, well, actually I'm vegan, and she knew about the word vegan, but she was so can you have yogurt? Can you have milk? And I had to be well, maybe some fruit or rice, and she was very accommodating and lovely, and it was an interesting exchange. But yeah, it's one of those things because food is so fundamental to how we move through the world, that being vegan does come up in your relationships to other people a lot. It's come up in different ways in my friendships, in my dating relationships, in my familial relationships. And it's just because if you spend any amount of time with other people, you're going to eat food together. And if you don't eat a lot of what they eat, there's going to be a little bit of conflict that needs to be resolved, or a little bit of accommodation that needs to happen.
How did you deal with this? So with this conflict and how to solve it maybe in a nice way?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it at the end of the day is to remember that you are in some ways like an ambassador for veganism. It's the same way when you travel and you might be an ambassador for the country you're from. Right? Like you travel somewhere and maybe they don't get a lot of tourists, and suddenly like how you are as a German affects their perception of all Germans, or how I am as an American affects to some extent a perception of how all Americans are. And it's very similar to veganism, I think. Where so it's important to remember to some extent that you are an ambassador for it. But I think also on the flip side, in situations where I have more of an ongoing relationship, I also notice then that the little annoyances or frustrations of being vegan can also serve as a steady reminder to the people you're with that like, but being vegan is an option. Like it is a choice that you could make. And I've gotten much more relaxed about that viewpoint, but even when you and I have eaten together, and like I can't try the soup that you got, even though it smells very nice because it has fish sauce in it, I think I laugh a little bit because it's happened so often in my life. So I think having a little bit of a sense of humor about it. And the other thing that helps a lot is always carrying a snack with you, because we all have less patience when we're hungry. Yeah,
that's right.
But you'll oftentimes be surprised by how accommodating people will be. I've been just utterly amazed in Thailand. Even when the restaurant doesn't have any vegan options on the menu, they have almost universally known what it is, and they've been willing to go out of their way to make the dish vegan, which has been just tremendous. That's been really nice here. And then another experience I had, which touched me very deeply, was actually when I was visiting my aunt in Germany. And this woman was in like her late 70s at this time. She lived in the same house for like 65 years. She and my uncle used to raise and slaughter pigs on the property. Like they kept chickens. And I thought there's no way Tante Renata will know about vegan food. And the first day I was there, this was my first time seeing her in like 20 years. And I was so self-conscious. And she offered me for breakfast, of course, an egg, like a hard-boiled egg. And for some reason, like I forced myself to eat it, which was probably the first non-vegan thing I had eaten in 5 or 8 years at that point. But I just didn't want to disrespect my aunt. And I figured, okay, it's a backyard egg, maybe it's not so bad. But it was a very weird and visceral experience because I wasn't used to it. And then later on in the day, it came out that I'm vegan, and my aunt just about slapped me across the head and said, "Why didn't you say something?" And then she walked over to the grocery store and came back with like tofu and nut butters and like vegan meat substitute slices and cheese, and she brought everything back for like brotzeit, all of it vegan with like Erdnussbutter and everything. And she was like, she brought me back soy milk to have in my coffee, and she just completely, her only annoyance was that I wasn't clear to her in the first place. And that was I really treasure that memory.
Nice, yeah. Really nice reaction.
Yeah.
Say so clear, okay, hey, just be yourself, allow. I'm there for you. I would like to give you what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. So especially since then, I've tried to just be a lot clearer about what I want and what I like and what my preferences are. And if I can eat something, that's great. And if I can't eat something, well, then I can't. But it's okay because I have a snack in my bag. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
How would you like the world to be? So if you could imagine really the world the most beautiful, or really that it would feel just like Schlaraffenland?
Yeah.
Or how would you like the world to deal with this topic?
Yeah.
From the offers and everything.
That is tremendously difficult to say.
If you could really choose
Yeah.
how you would like.
I mean, if I could really have it to my personal preference, like people wouldn't eat animals. Like we wouldn't eat each other in the same way that we wouldn't commit violence against each other, and we'd all live in harmony together, and it would be great. Admittedly, the world isn't like that. And I think there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this. There's some schools of ethical thought, for example, like carnivores in the wild are going to eat other animals. Like, okay, if we have a house pet like a cat and it's an obligate carnivore, it has to eat meat, then, you know, maybe once we have like lab-grown meat, then we can feed the cat lab-grown meat and no mice have to die and the cat can still eat meat and it can be the way it needs to be. But certainly in the wild, animals are going to eat each other. So there might be different ethical systems that we apply to how sapient beings, creatures that are capable of self-conscious thought like humans, what our expectations are of how they relate to themselves and each other, and other non-sapient beings like non-human animals, versus what we expect of like domesticated animals like cats and dogs that live with humans, versus what we expect of wild animals, where we might give the most permission to eat each other to wild animals, and we say, okay, they are outside of like ethical systems, but like humans, because we are capable of making conscious choices, we expect the most self-regulated behavior from humans, and that's one way of going. But I think it's very hard, it can be very tricky to set expectations on other human beings. It can be very difficult to make other people act in ways that you want them to if they don't want to. And in human society, under governments, when you codify those expectations into laws and then enforce them through police and military, those laws and expectations become enforced through a threat of violence. And I would be very uncomfortable, for example, with forcing all of the world to be vegan and saying, if you're not vegan, we will come arrest you, and if you resist arrest, we will shoot you. So that's sort of like mandated veganism. Doesn't really work for me. I do think that it's not black and white when it comes to eating animals. I do think that there are some systems of eating animals that are much worse than other systems. So like factory farming, especially factory farming as it has evolved to be like very efficient, very large scale. I think now, depending on the country and the type of animal, between 90 and 99+% of animals or the meat that's being eaten comes from factory farms. In a lot of Western countries, I think for chickens, for example, I think it is like 98, 99%. And these are like really terrible conditions, especially when there's not much legislation in place to at least assure some freedom to move, for the animals to not be crowded in, to not be injected full of drugs to keep them from getting sick. And you juxtapose that on one very far end from like another very far end where you say, well, it's okay to eat meat, but only if the animal grew up in the wild and the person eating it has to go out and hunt it themselves, and then that person is taking full responsibility for it and the animal has a chance to get away. And I don't really romanticize hunting, but I do think that if I were either the animal that was raised in a factory farm and maybe like a chicken, and I got killed at 6 weeks old after living crowded in with others for the entirety of my short, painful existence, to take that and compare it to getting to live out in the forest or in a field or in the ocean, and to have a more natural way of being, I would certainly prefer the second one. So I think if we can, as a society, at least reduce the amount of meat and animal products that we eat, to the point that factory farming is no longer needed to make it affordable, but rather we treat meat and milk and other animal products as a kind of like a luxury item, a once-in-a-while item, that alone could do a lot to reduce the level of suffering in the world. But it's always a weird position to be in, to think about what does the ideal world look like to you, and to say that it does include some animal eating. But I think there's some realism in that, because you cannot legislate the way people are. So you have to account for what people really want. And I think throughout human history, many people have wanted to eat animals to some extent.
What do you think about producing meat in a not natural way? So in laboratory?
Yeah.
What's your point of view on this?
I think it's largely harm-free. Sometimes there is a relatively less harm being done to animals. Like right now, as I understand it, with lab-grown meat, they do use, for like beef, for example, cows, they do use, I believe, the embryos, like calf embryos, to create the basic genetic material that they then turn into lab-grown meat. I haven't read too much into it because I'm not really a target audience for lab-grown meat, but in general, if it reduces the harm in the world, I'm probably okay with it. In the same way that I'm okay with legislation that gives more space to factory-farmed animals, even though I think factory farming should be abolished completely. But in general, I think lab-grown meat could be a way to satisfy the consumer demand for meat while reducing the number of animals that are being factory-farmed. And to me, this is a positive thing. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I must say, I meant the question before a bit different, and I like the answer you gave, because it's a different perspective, and it's more about how should the world be.
Yeah.
And so really nice answer, and I would like to clarify how I meant the question.
Please.
Was more like, because you said if you are vegan, or for example, I have a very close friend and she's not allowed to eat many things, so for her really eating is not a joy very often, it's just stress and really not feeling seen and not being able really to be herself, because the offers are just not there.
Yeah.
And so my question was, with all those varieties, so that some people are very much into eating meat and for them it's completely fine. For other people, they completely want to eat vegetarian, other people want to completely eat vegan. And so how you would really, so with allowing that every person can choose the way he or she wants to choose, how would you like to have the offers and the behavior, and how we can deal with it, that everybody is really satisfied, or that you are satisfied? So how would you imagine the world to make offers to be that it would feel like you can have everything what you want, or you would feel seen, and this feeling of somehow it's tricky and somehow it's not so easy would be a way, or also with the people, let's say it like this first.
Yeah.
So more from the offer side.
The offer side. I'll admit now I don't totally understand your question. Do you mean like when lab-grown meat becomes widely available and we offer it, would I want people to eat it, or
No. It's for me. It's not about trying to convince anybody or making it in a way fanatic.
Yeah.
But to look, okay, right now on our planet we have very different ways of how people want to nourish themselves, and with allowing all those options, how would you like that it would feel really comfortable, so that that you would maybe not feel like a minority that has to explain oneself, and that it's maybe like a fighting or always having to find a way, that it would feel just natural, and that all the different ways are equal. Let's say equal, or also how would it feel right for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I have an answer that probably won't sit well with a lot of people. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I live in a magical world now. When I went vegan, 15 years ago or so, depending on how you want to count it, there were just so many fewer products available in the store. So now you have like fermented vegan cheeses, you have like a dozen different kinds of non-dairy milk, you have all sorts of artificial meats, and it's just, even though these aren't usually the cheapest options available, it's still so much variety, and there's so many more vegan restaurants than there used to be as well, and it's becoming also so much more normal to at least have a vegan option on the menu. So, seeing how it is now versus even the recent past is very exciting. And to wonder like where it's going in another 10 or 20 or 30 years, I'm very curious. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you could create it, how would you create it?
If I could create it, how would I create it? I mean, at the end of the day, I think I would like for it to be at least easier to be vegan than to be non-vegan. I think that it would be nice if it were easier, and also for it in a similar but separate way, for it to be easier to eat a relatively healthy, unprocessed diet than to eat heavily processed food. Coming from the U.S., again, like now I live in the Bay Area, and it's pretty easy to eat healthy, but there's still a lot. But the farther away you go from there, and even there, depending on what neighborhood you're in, like the default choice is heavily processed, unhealthy food that oftentimes relies heavily on meat or other animal product ingredients. So I'd love to at least see a shift to where the default type of eating, the type of food that people eat, to what is normal, to be fairly whole foods, plant-based. That is one change I would like to see, and I think would generally benefit people. You get some interesting side questions there with people who feel that plant-based diets are not good for their digestion, and that's a whole separate conversation.
And then you would feel completely fulfilled, so this would really be the...
I think it's one of the aspects of human nature that we rarely feel completely fulfilled for long. So no, I don't think I would feel completely fulfilled.
And how would you like that we would deal with this topic, and how would you like to have the offers that you would really feel completely fulfilled? So really, if everything is possible and you can really create it the way you really want it, and every single thing is just
Yeah.
that's it for me, and that's how I want the planet to be.
Yeah. I'm going to answer that question by answering a different question. Because earlier you asked me a really good question, and unfortunately the camera stopped as I was answering, and I'm going to shoehorn in that answer now. But you asked me, I think, and I'm adapting your words here, but essentially, like, how can we all live together? How can people make their own choices for how they eat and nourish themselves, so that we have respect for everyone? Did I get that question right? Yeah, and I answered quite energetically, I thought, that I actually think that all choices are not created equal. And when we look at society, there are a lot of forms of violence, and I say this despite my earlier statement that laws are just a threat of violence, but we have a lot of behaviors that we as a society, we say aren't okay. We don't allow people to kill other people, to steal from them, to physically hurt them, to have big financial scams as white-collar criminals, although we tend to punish those a lot less than we do like worker class crimes. But anyway, like, we as a society say there are a lot of behaviors that we are collectively not okay with. This idea of animals deserving certain protection is one of those areas where vegans disagree with most non-vegans. And I think it becomes a question of, like, what rights do we think like sentient non-human animals should have? And there's a thought, I don't remember where I heard this or who said it, but it was essentially that, like, people can live together with very diverse opinions, very different opinions about how we ought to behave, as long as we are in agreement on two things. And the first one is what constitutes harm, and the second one is who deserves protection from harm. So as long as we can agree on what it means not to harm each other, like, we can get along easily. But this becomes very difficult, and I think this is also one of the reasons why veganism can be very triggering with non-vegans, is because there's a fundamental disagreement about what constitutes harm and who deserves protection from that harm. And that's where vegans then say that, hey, they're, like, first off, it's not really about me, it's about these animals that we're raising in factory farms, that we're killing, that we're eating by the billions. So then it becomes about saying, hey, these beings that can't really speak up for themselves are deserving of protection as well. And that there are many ways in which we harm them that we don't recognize as harm. And this inability to see animals as non-human animals as being able to be harmed is very deeply ingrained in our society. And if you read a lot of scientific papers, even up into the 70s and 80s, it was a default position in, I think, like psychiatric papers or papers that studied animals, to assume that they were not capable of suffering in the same way that humans are, that they don't experience pain like we do, that they don't experience hurt like we do, that their brains are fundamentally completely different from ours. And that's probably not actually the case, and the difference between human and non-human animals is a lot fuzzier and more blurred than we previously understood, but that old way of thinking is still deeply ingrained in our society. But that's one of the things that I think makes it really hard to be vegan in the non-vegan world, because there's this really deep disagreement about whether or not we are causing a massive amount of harm.
What I find interesting is, so I have in general a different point of view.
Yeah.
I don't want to give it in right now, but this part I would like to give in, because for me plants are very intelligent, and for me, I don't know if plants are not much more intelligent and much more conscious than I am.
Yeah.
So I would, for myself, really question this, because if I go into nature, it always raises my energy. So there seems to be something that they understood that I did not get until now.
Yeah.
Or it feels like this, and I can completely, or I would say fruits, okay, they're falling down, I would say, okay, there's really no topic about can I take it or not. But with, also planting plants in a not natural way and then cutting them, is it less harming than with animals? So I'm not 100% sure, and I can't ask them. So for me, animals, okay, it's very clear that they are suffering. Plants, I don't know there. How would you deal with this, or what's your perspective, or
If there were the same level of evidence that plants suffer and are sentient in the way that we have very clear evidence that animals are capable of suffering, that they have a sense of self, that they are sentient, that there is like a perceiving being behind those eyes, then I would probably have to think very deeply about how I eat plants. But the fortunate thing for me is that we don't have that kind of evidence. And even though there is evidence, for example, of like fungal systems that are like massive and interact in each other with very, very complex ways, there is so far, to my knowledge, zero evidence of a central nervous system, which we understand to be somewhat key to the like perceiving self that creates sentience and the ability to suffer. That being said, I still try to act respectfully of all living beings, including plants, and this big old Gaia Earth that we live on, and to think about like future generations. So I think that's a very interesting point, and I'm very curious if we ever gain evidence that maybe there is like a massive Gaia mind behind the whole organic planet that we live on, or not. But there is like very clear evidence that we are doing harm to cows and pigs and chickens on a massive scale. And I think it's important to separate the uncertainty from the things that we do have evidence and certainty for, and to really focus in on like the things where there is clear harm happening at a massive scale. How do we act with responsibility and compassion around that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it is an important question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And if it turned out that every time I ate a grain of rice, a rice plant was suffering, then I would probably have to go like fruitarian and only eat fruit. And then I would be really curious, like, where's my fucking protein coming from? Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, yeah.
Yeah.
Depending on the way where we think, we can really build ourselves, or I would say I can build myself a cave or like a cage. And yeah, it's really not so easy to find the right way. And I like to speak about this topic because I feel, okay, there are some points that I can really get out, and or some points where it matches deeper with myself than my truth until now. And I think maybe it's about this, to open a field of conversation, get different views, and then finding a better way in general.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to have those conversations, and I really appreciate the openness and curiosity with which you approach this conversation and with which you listen to what I say. And I think that's really good and really valuable because one of those things that I think can be frustrating to vegans and how they relate to other people is that a lot of times these questions are asked in an authentic way and meant perhaps more to goad or to bait. So that's another one of those little ways in which vegans navigate this, because these beliefs are far outside of what many people consider the norm.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm aware it's getting a bit dark. There is one question I think could be interesting, especially because this is a relationship-based podcast. And I'll like feed it to you, and then you can ask it to me if you want or not. But like, it could be something along the lines of like, would I date a non-vegan, or how do I think about dating non-vegans, or is it important to me to date somebody who agrees with me on this issue? But that could be a way to kind of, at the end, tie it all back to the, or edit it in at the very beginning and start off on a strong note, because I'm sure many more people watch the first 5 minutes than the last 5 minutes. But anyway, it occurs to me that that's...
the first and the last, interesting.
Yeah, but it occurs to me that's a kind of a good question that's very central to, like, very literal. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's step into this question.
Cool. Would you like to ask it?
Yeah. After this, I would also have one last question, and I think then the topic is round for now.
Cool.
How is it for you if you meet a girl and maybe you fall in love, or you're just dating and getting to know different women, maybe also men, I don't know 100%, or let's say people.
I appreciate that.
Sorry for everybody.
Yeah.
Just people, if you are dating, and how do you deal with this topic? So is it important for you that the other person is also vegan or maybe vegetarian? How do you deal with this ethical conflict that might appear? Also maybe with different foods you would have to cook? Practical thing? Yeah, just in general, what's your point of view and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that given the sum of my experience, I think it would be easiest for me in my next relationship to be with somebody who generally eats the same things I do, especially because if you live with someone, or if you're with somebody a lot, you're going to be sharing a lot of meals, and it's a lot easier to cook one meal than it is to cook two. And I've had 3 kind of partnership level relationships in my life, and all 3 of them were with someone who at the start of the relationship was not vegan. They had all tried veganism in the past, and they all found it a little bit too much effort or too difficult right then, and they tended to eat more vegan, especially because I like to cook. But in all, 3 cases, there was always a little bit of tension around it. And I think especially when that person has additional restrictions on what they eat, like they can't really digest, or they feel they can't digest like lentils and legumes and a lot of vegetables well, and that's a lot of the food that I eat. And they prefer not to eat gluten even if they can eat gluten. Then the overlap of what we can eat together becomes smaller and smaller. And even though it's not like a primary reason for being in a relationship with someone, just the convenience factor of what you can eat together, I think is kind of a big deal. And then the other one is having aligned values. And that comes back to that fundamental question of like who's deserving of protection from harm. And if you don't agree with that with somebody, then that can feel like a big emotional disconnect. So I'm not really sure if certainly in a casual way or a fun way or hanging out with people, like almost none of my friends are vegan. Like I think I might like have a casual relationship with somebody who wasn't vegan, although it feels very weird to kiss somebody right after they eat like a steak. That's like very, especially if you can still taste the steak in their mouth. That's very. So brush your teeth after you eat that steak, people. Your vegan boo will appreciate it. But I think it would be easier, and it might feel more aligned and easy to date somebody who is vegan. And when I have talked about this with friends of mine who are vegan or read about it online, there's a big split. There's a lot of people who started relationships before they became vegan. Their partner didn't become vegan. Sometimes they find it easy, sometimes they find it hard. People I know who've been vegan for a very long time, in my personal life, at this point, they tend to say I would only date somebody who's vegan because it is aligned with my values, and it would be hard for me to date somebody who doesn't share my values. But since only like maybe 2 or 3% of Californians where I live are vegan, that really cuts down on the dating pool. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah.
But maybe or what comes directly is maybe can also be a chance because you don't have to date those 98% to find someone who has, in this point, compatible values, and maybe then also in other points, because or I would say how I experience for me that is what I eat and which values I have has much to do with my consciousness where I am right now.
Yeah.
And also a bit with the surrounding because I'm affected.
Yeah.
But maybe it's a gift to not. Yeah, maybe it's really easier to find the right matches.
To look at as an opportunity.
Yeah. And, I don't know, but it came up immediately that maybe it might generally fit with the consciousness better than with the other 98%.
I'm curious. Yeah. I'm not actively dating right now, but when I do, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I really like.
Oh. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to me go off on something I feel very strongly about. I appreciate you holding that space.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you hold much with me. The last question. It's already dark, but the last question I would like to ask, because it's just so sticky inside me, and I don't know really what is the question, I think, but what you said very often and what really sticks to me is harming.
Yeah.
I think I didn't see it from this point, or not. Maybe in parts, but not in this way how you obviously feel it and see it and receive it. How would you tell it?
To think about this issue of harm that happens.
Yeah, so I have the feeling that you have really a feeling for this harm, or I don't know, it's something from the inside that, or something very, where for me you feel very deeply connected to, or I don't know, it feels very much like yourself.
Yeah.
And what is harm?
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to ask, but I would like to get it more. How? Yeah.
That's a huge question, and I'm sure people have written whole books on that. Yeah. But I do think that veganism as a movement, when it was founded back in the 1940s, and I'm going to paraphrase roughly here, but the way they self-defined was that veganism is a practice of respecting animals, by minimizing to the fullest extent possible the way that we eat animals and use animal products. And first off, I think that's a pretty well thought out definition. The idea of to the fullest extent possible creates a lot of space for people who maybe don't have the means to be fully vegan, or they don't find it easy to be fully vegan. And it does allow for a lot of space in your personal interpretation of what that is and what's practical for you. But your question was about harm, and I think for me it's just, for me at least, because I so drastically changed my relationship to food when I was 20. I lost like 50 kilo in a year. I began eating very healthy. And I just looked with awareness on every meal that I had. And one of those shifts in awareness was that it just became very visceral to me how on the other side of a chicken breast or a steak or a hamburger or an egg or a glass of milk, there was an animal. Like there was an animal that lived a life. And then especially when you, for example, watch some factory farming videos, it became, for me, very hard to look at the hamburger or the cappuccino and not think about, like, what kind of a life did that cow have? Like a pretty short life, one without a lot of freedom to be in the way that a cow necessarily wants to be. That sense of harm did become very visceral and real. And I think that's true for a lot of vegans. And it's one of the reasons why you find vegans can be so, can have such strong feelings about it. Because they look at the meat or the eggs, and to them they see suffering animals that are being prioritized as less than oftentimes the taste preferences of the person making a consumer choice. And we as a society have gotten very good at separating that animal suffering from what shows up on the plate. We've really disembodied the animals. We've taken the bodies away from the animals to make cheap meat and cheap eggs and cheap milk available. Yeah. And I mean, the same can be said about the people who work in these factory farms. Certainly, in general, in life, I think I try to reduce the amount of harm that I cause, certainly the amount of unnecessary harm. And
that's a good point, not necessary harm.
Yeah, and it's just that, I think it is this way for a lot of vegans. When you look at like a hamburger or a glass of milk or an egg on the dining table, you see not just that product, but you also kind of see the experience of the animal that lived and died for this to be available cheaply as a consumer good. And if you've never watched like a factory farming video, I, of course, being vegan, highly recommend watching several of them. Maybe I would personally recommend, I think after around 8 or 10 hours, maybe spread across a month, so you're not really making yourself sick in one day, but like maybe every time before you sit down to eat a hamburger or meat, take 10 or 15 minutes to watch factory farming videos and begin to connect like the food that you're eating to the experiences that the animals are having, and see if that shifts how you feel about the dietary choices that you're making. For me, it certainly made a big shift. Yeah.
If you could direct a message to the people listening, what would you like to say?
If you listened all this way, thank you. I know that it can be hard to listen to somebody express viewpoints that maybe you don't agree with fully, but if you listened all this way, you might be curious. And I would say, if you haven't watched any factory farming documentaries, watch a few. If you've been thinking about eating less meat or less milk and eggs or fish, look into what you can substitute that with in your diet and how you can still enjoy your food. And feel free to take baby steps in these changes. I spent probably 7 years going vegan, but it was always with that long view towards causing less harm in the world. So I think if it's your goal in your life to minimize the active harm that you cause, veganism is a great choice that you can incorporate into how you live your life. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for your honesty,
your
openness, and also your time.
Thank you, Franzi.
Yeah. ขอบคุณครับ
ขอบคุณครับ Right on. Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for going on this journey. I hope that you got something inspiring out of it. And now I just want to make it short. If you want to go in contact with me, you find everything in the show notes. I'm happy about a thumb up, and in general I just want to wish you that you have a really pleasant time and that you're dealing good with the topics you have, and that you have inspiration all around you, and I give you a kiss. See you in a while.